the Civility double bind. I've been watching a lot of theremin trees. I like the dude's voice. It's very calming. His logic it has this inevitable quality about it. And so he was talking about double binds, and it helped me kind of reframe one of the things I've been thinking about in this should we offend people thing. This is a little off the storyboard, but let's dig in. The Civility double bind. Censorship is uncivil, right? We examined that in Is Pornography Good for Society? Probably not, but access to pornography is vital for society, because otherwise you have someone in charge telling people what materials they can and cannot consume for ultimately arbitrary reasons. And so it is more benefit to society to censor very, very carefully and sparingly than it is to omit pornographic material from society. Okay. So, censorship is uncivil. To be more specific, it is illiberal. The way we're using the term liberalism is in part when we give people good information and trust people to make good decisions based on that information. So rather than ban guns, I would make sure that all of the information about guns is widely available and people are educated enough to consume good faith information about guns and make a decision. It's quite far from where we are. I agree. So as we started to unpack in the previous video, authoritarian approaches actually tend to increase violence. You can be really worried about the rates of violent crime in Chicago and send in more police, but the more police you send in, the more violent things are going to become because of meta communication. The reason we refrain from harmful statements becomes the fear of punishment rather than concern for the feelings of others. It's better in a society to make people empathetic and well-educated than it is to tell them what they can and cannot say. When we are strong and the punisher is not present, what we've learned is that force is an appropriate way to get what we want. The meta-communication video. Nazis like unmoderated forums, especially online where they can remain anonymous while they sort of stir up the pot. 2 years ago, I consumed Ian Danskin on the topic. Link, you really shouldn't be listening to me. Honestly, you should be listening to Ian Danskin. I'm going to try and go beyond the stuff that he says in his series on this topic. Some forums are moderated. Nazis prefer the unmoderated ones, but they found ways even to exploit moderated ones. Meet the Press, for example. Chuck Todd lets a lot of bullcrap through the filters, largely in the name of both sidesism, of making sure everyone's represented. Danielle Pletka, the last time I watched Meet the Press, possibly ever, Danielle Pletka, American Enterprise Institute, she's a troll. She never has any opinion except we should listen to everyone, hear everyone out. The Nazis have a point here, actually, and we should lower taxes on rich people because that's the goal of the American Enterprise Institute, all right? And she was saying the roundtable discussion in the last segment of the show, she was saying some pernicious bullcrap. And Chuck didn't, but all of the other guests at the table shouted her down. They became uncivil, full with her incivility masquerading as civility, full of her blatant, outrageous lies. They finally erupted in protest. I haven't watched to see if she's come back on the show. Not for anything in particular about the show or Chuck Todd, but because I'm full of politics I'm going to take a couple years off while we have a kind of real president for a while. All right. So Chuck Todd lets a bunch of stuff through, and when he tries to moderate Kellyanne Conway's absurd lies in 2016, she just switches to attack mode. And what she does is demand civility from Chuck Todd and civility from the press, while at the same time lying, cheating, and stealing, spreading propaganda and confusion with everything that she says. And those things are incompatible. Kellyanne Conway is not a civil actor, and she's exploiting the tendency to civility in American society. All right. This is an effective strategy. Lie, insult, abuse, then claim victimhood when the press limits your time. Shout over others, then complain when others collectively shout you down. Or, if you have all the power, break the law, then claim you didn't break the law. Then, when it starts to come out, claim you don't know anything about it. When it's clear you did know something about it, slowly disclose, rolling disclosure. Word of the year, 2016, slowly disclose. Yes, I did it, but it wasn't illegal. Yes, I did it, and it is illegal, but that law is rarely enforced anyway. Yes, I did it, it is illegal, but actually you can't stop me. You don't have the votes in the Senate. And then finally, in the end, when it's all coming crashing down, claim it's a witch hunt. It's a witch hunt by a biased liberal system that is uncivil. They're coming after us unfairly because they don't like us. They hate us for our freedoms. In moderated forums online, these tactics needn't be this brazen. The former president can say things, and then someone can go, you said the opposite a month ago. And he says, no, I didn't. But there's tape. There's tape. Been saying the opposite. That's brazen lying. It's not necessary in moderated forums online because of anonymity. Nazi apologists on TV don't have access to these kinds of strategies. So one strategy in 3 parts is called sock puppets. We tend to agree with opinions that come from our in-group and disagree with ones from our out-group. So experiments with Israelis and Palestinians in the 80s showed each group likely to agree with the other group's proposal when we lied and said those proposals actually came from someone in their own in-group. So we're not evaluating ideas on their basis, we're evaluating them on who we trust, right? So it's common practice now when you're interacting on something like Twitter for right-wing politicians in particular to create fake online identities posing as members of minority groups, the minority groups they're attempting to oppress, and then showing support for right-wing ideology. Even, or mainly, the role of these kinds of sock puppets would be to attack actual members of that minority group, to drive wedges, to prevent meaningful blocks and especially voting blocks and ideological blocks from forming. This happens to me with some regular basis, and all I can do is block people. That's it. So that's number one sock puppet tactic. The second tactic in this strategy is most of Trump's Twitter followers turn out to be bots. Bots can amplify a message by automatically retweeting everything, but mainly what they do is make it look like a position or a person is very popular, when in fact they're not very popular. This gives rise to false consensus. In my state, there was a Trump rally in 2020, and literally 870 people attended. And to get to like 870, they had to bus people in from literally hundreds of miles around. So the right-wingers were careful to like really zoom in on the crowd. 800 people looks like a lot of people as long as you don't show the empty space around them, right? Okay. So the third tactic here is you can post a thing with your real identity. And then when someone complains or argues, you attack them from a bunch of alternate identities. And that really makes them seem very, very outnumbered when in fact you're not outnumbered at all. And like the real world equivalent of this is The 2004 nipple slip, the wardrobe malfunction, allegedly. Uh, the FCC, the FCC received hundreds of complaints about this, and they fined the network a substantial amount of money, but they did not receive hundreds of good faith complaints. In fact, all of the hundreds of complaints came from two conservative Christian men in Colorado. No one else cared. No one else in America cared. There wasn't even a nipple visible, and all of that drama. No one really cared. The chief tactic, getting away from sock puppets, the chief tactic is appeals to free speech. So Elon Musk wants to buy Twitter. Right now, what is it? It's 3 skull o'clock. Elon Musk wants to buy Twitter. And like the insiders kind of predict, what he wants to do really is re-enable Trump and a bunch of other accounts. Musk has some ideas about free speech that are really very conservative ideas about free speech. The air quotes, because conservative in geopolitics doesn't mean what conservative means in American politics. Words get borrowed, you know. And what Musk seems to think is that money equals speech. That is, we're all equally free to spend $25 million to buy a social media platform to amplify our own ideas. And unregulated markets are free markets, and unregulated speech is free speech. And that's not true. Unregulated markets mean that the people who already have money can get more money and form monopolies and keep everybody else out. You can go around and kick down all the ladders and make sure they stay on top. That's not free. That's just giving power over to the people you don't vote for instead of keeping it with the people you do vote for. And free speech, same concept. Loudest voice wins. The person who can amplify their voice the most wins. So Nazis really want to be able to say whatever they want without any interference. And that is what's being taken as free speech. When forums have moderators, they attack the moderators relentlessly. I've been in this position before. Moderating a forum about fiction, and the romance novelists were the worst. You know, violating the rules about self-promotion and then attacking me for enforcing the very clear rules about self-promotion. So when forums have moderation, they attack the moderators and cite spurious claims to free speech or some offbeat interpretations of forum rules, or that the forum rules in some way conflict with the platform rules, and they actually don't, make threats. No, I didn't just say romance novelists are Nazis. I said they use the same tactics sometimes when self-promotion is really important. Platform and forum rules can at times be dense, and they can be confusing. And they result in some weird judgment calls. Facebook, for example, disallows specific threats against individuals or disparagement of specific groups. But the former president used to post all kinds of degrading speech about Muslims, Hispanic immigrants, trans people, persons of disability, and on and on. And Facebook almost never, I call it Facebook because that's where facts go to die, almost never acted to limit him in any way, or to limit the misinformation that other people spread when sharing the content of his speeches verbatim. I mean, if Richard Spencer said, "We should murder Jews," and then I quote Richard Spencer by saying, "Richard Spencer says we should murder Jews," that's not hate speech. That's reporting on what somebody else said. That would be far different from a direct claim that we should murder Jews. And even that second statement might pass muster if prefaced with "I believe it," because I'm not making a factual claim then. I'm making a claim to faith or belief, and if it's sincere, then do I have the right to say it? The big media platforms are notoriously bad at limiting the speech of Nazis. What I haven't done so far is define civility. So let's get into that. Civility in this context might mean an agreement to refrain from personal attacks, to argue in good faith, and to be inclusive, limiting speech to prevent the outgrouping of vulnerable minorities, right? So we wouldn't let Richard Spencer talk about Jewish people. There's harm from that happening, and your right to swing your fists ends when someone else's nose begins. So we would, to be inclusive and let everyone feel like we have a safe place where dialogue is possible, we might limit those kinds of speech, which enables speech. What about majorities? Should I limit stuff that disparages majorities? What constitutes a minority anyway? Can I mock Christians? In an online forum, am I permitted to mock Christians? What about Nazis? Do I owe Nazis an argument? Because they're never going to change their mind. They're on the forum to influence other people, not to be influenced, and no amount of arguing is going to stop them from their task. And big television and radio and so forth platforms, the internet, I guess, Joe Rogan and Bill Maher, these are libertarian-leaning guys who think that the marketplace of ideas is fair, and if someone comes on, whether or not they're speaking in good faith, we owe them a platform to say their ideas, and then if those ideas hold up to scrutiny, we accept them, and if they don't hold up to scrutiny, we reject them. But then they're giving a lot of airtime to a lot of people with a lot of very bad ideas who actually sway the public. Because they never change their mind, they just keep refining their argument. So how can you tell if someone's a good faith arguer? Someone is just asking the questions, rather than they're a Nazi and they're doing a coordinated influence campaign. Well, that's notoriously difficult. Twitter can't. Twitter doesn't know that. They know that the more you let Trump tweet, the more people die of COVID, all right? And there's some responsibility there to stop people dying of preventable illnesses because they listen to people telling them that COVID's a conspiracy. The local news can't tell the difference. Those rallies against masks in schools, against vaccines, against critical race theory, those were all campaigns coordinated by far-right pro-Trump groups, activists. So I'll try and link you an astroturfing video from John Oliver. And man, just right now, go look up the Brooks Brothers riots. This brings us to the double bind and the Elon Musk problem. The thing to do with Nazis is throw them off the platform as soon as you detect them. I don't moderate any forums these days. It's too exhausting. But I regularly toss Nazis out of my comment section here on the Black Pill, and I block them from my social media. But isn't that uncivil? Well, influencers of all stripes have not committed to good faith dialogue. In a good faith dialogue, we've each agreed to abide by the rules of reason, to change our minds based on new information, and disclosed at least to ourselves what it would take to change our minds. Nazis appear to follow all the forum rules, but they are there to persuade rather than discuss. And the thing they are persuading toward is the collapse of American democracy and ultimately the murder of all the vulnerable minorities. But we're caught. We're caught in a double bind. The paradox of tolerance has us by the teeth. A tolerant society protects minority views, and Nazis are a minority view. But if we tolerate them, they tend to become a large enough minority to take control of the government. And when they do, they end everyone else's freedoms of speech. Writing, access, journalism, protest, representation in law, freedom of association. Nazi political theorist Carl Schmitt reduces politics to the identification of the enemy, the elimination of that enemy, and the elevation of the friend. Lots of American states have already passed laws limiting protest, as well as voting based on political affiliation and skin color. Link. If you throw the bums out, You've used your authority and empowered arguments to authoritarianism. They're just as bad. If you don't throw the bums out, Nazis have platforms and know how to use them to distort, misinform, manipulate, and recruit. And this is the classic double bind. I'm not good at chess. I know one trick and one trick only. Spot a place where I can move a knight so that in the next turn, I can take one of two important pieces. If I can line up where I could move this way and get your rook and that way and get your queen, I've created a double bind. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If my knight is safe, then you have to try and protect one of your other pieces. If you can effectively retaliate against my knight, even if you can't get a piece out of the way, I still take that higher value piece. I come out ahead in the resulting bloodbath, and that's where we are. We're losing our civility because we're too tolerant of Nazis and not tolerant enough of Nazis. But which piece do you want to sacrifice? Either we limit public speech on private platforms like Twitter and Facebook, or we lose the ability ever to do so in the future.